Good evening and welcome back to the second evening of Solano Pride Center's 5-day series focusing on Transgender Day of Remembrance. My name is Jamie Eels Booth. My pronouns are them, they, and he, him, and I'm the Solano Pride Center's Youth Services Coordinator. Back to the second evening of Solano Pride Center's 5-day series. It's my pleasure to host this evening's event. My name is Jamie Eels Booth. My pronouns are them, they, and he, him, and I'm the Solano Pride Center's Youth Services Coordinator. To the second evening of Solano Pride Center's 5-day series. It's my I had a little technical difficulties. I'm so sorry. During the presentation, we encourage those of you that are live streaming to please feel free and comment and or ask questions. Bear with me one second. I'm so sorry. I think we're back up and running. So again, during the presentation, we encourage those of you that are live streaming to please feel free to comment and or ask questions in the chat. We'll be monitoring the feed throughout and want to ensure that your comments and questions are addressed. During last night's event, Gwen Smith, the founder of Trans Day of Remembrance, discussed their journey as both a transgender person and advocate. Gwen Smith's advocacy work indirectly or directly helped some shape, if not all, the transgender support systems and services we have in place today. For transgender advocates, Gwen's motivation and dedication were instrumental in what we now bring to our own work as advocates and LGBTQ serving organizations. Normally, during this time of year, we try to gather as a community in solidarity and love and commitment to change. And over 20 years, on November 20th, Solano Pride Center has joined other LGBTQ centers in honoring and remembering transgender people whose lives were taken by anti-transgender violence and hate crimes. It was at such an event that I first met this evening's speaker almost 6 years ago. If you're an LGBTQ person and you see another rainbow flag, it's a good indication that you're on the same side of a lot of different social issues. And I was right. I found an ally. This evening's speaker has helped mentor and support hundreds of transgender and gender nonconforming people over the years, and is a committed transgender rights advocate, one of the most committed that I know. It's my honor to welcome Jeriann Guzman from the Serenity Center. Good evening, Jeriann, and thanks so much for joining us virtually this year. I'm really excited for what you have planned for us tonight, but first I'd love if you could tell everyone more about yourself and the Serenity Center and the great work that you do there.
Well, thank you for welcoming me to this online event. This is something that is really changed this year thanks to COVID. But I think it opens up more ways that we can actually talk to people. My name is Jeriann Guzman. I am the co-founder, president, and executive director of Solano Serenity Center, located in Vallejo, California. Solano Serenity Center is an LGBTQ two-spirit advocacy group, and I with a few friends of mine started Serenity Center 8 years ago, and we have been producing this Transgender Day of Remembrance on the Saturday following TDOR or close to TDOR for the past 6 years now in Vallejo. Tonight's presentation is going to be about the history of the LGBT movement going into Transgender Day of Remembrance. it's important to know the history, because if you don't know the history, then the names that we read, the situations we find ourselves in have no context. So that's why I developed this presentation tonight. I identify, by the way, as two-spirit transgender. I am Native American, Purepecha. My family is from Michoacan, Mexico. So tonight I will be showing some slides and trying to get this to work on a slide share. Let's see. Escape. Present online. In the beginning. Oh, you got okay. 1 second. I have my own little hiccups with all this. Here we go. Back to the meeting. Share screen. Slides. Share. So Transgender Day of Remembrance, from Cooper's Donuts to Stonewall and beyond. These are the events that led up to Stonewall. Cooper's Donuts in 1959, Compton's Cafeteria in San Francisco in 1966, the Black Cat Tavern in 1967, the Patch Bar in 68, and finally Stonewall. These are spots in history that often get overlooked and never chained together. One led into the other, which led into the other, and you need to know the histories. Cooper's Donuts was in May of 1959 and was thought to be the first gay uprising in the United States. It was a hangout in Los Angeles between two bars that were gay bars. The transgender individuals were not allowed into the gay bars because of rule number 9. Rule number 9 said, let me get to it real quick here. That people could not dress as the opposite sex to impersonate the opposite sex, whether performer or not. So if they were in a bar and they were dressed as a woman, as a lot of us male to female transgender people do, we were impersonating the opposite sex. So that would give the police the right to raid that establishment, question the individuals, rough up the individuals, and eventually take them to jail. In 1959, Cooper's Donuts had such an action happen where the police came in and did raid the establishment. And when they were handcuffing one of the patrons in the restaurant, she refused to go quietly. And she threw coffee at a cop. He then was taking her out to his patrol car, and the patrons of Cooper's Donuts and onlookers started throwing coffee cups, donuts, and trash at and into the patrol car. They needless to say, the police at the time turned around and ran for the hills, so to speak, until they could bring back reinforcements. When they did arrest up to 13 different people for disorderly conduct and impersonation and lewd acts. as far as they were concerned. But Cooper's Donuts was a catalyst here on the West Coast, again in 1959. The next catalyst was Gene Compton's Cafeteria, which was in San Francisco, right at 100 Turk and Taylor Streets. Those streets now are named Gene Compton's Cafeteria Way and Vicky Marlane. Vicky Marlane was a entertainer in San Francisco and a very big activist. And it was the first time in San Francisco in 2014 that they actually named a street after a transgender individual in the United States. Compton's Cafeteria was the first time the LGBT individuals fought back against police violence in San Francisco. Compton's was again a hangout in the Tenderloin for transgender individuals. At the time, they were known as transsexuals, which we no longer use that term. There are many different versions of what happened there, but it was known that Compton's would charge a surcharge service fee for those transgender individuals coming in to eat because, again, San Francisco had their own rule number 9. The rule against impersonating the opposite sex. So they could target the establishment, again, the police. So to stop this, Compton's started charging transgender individuals a service fee to dine there. But they would continue to harass them at the same time to try to get them out. One such evening, they were harassing an individual. They called the cops because a group of transgender individuals got rowdy in the cafeteria. Cops came in, they arrested some people, and one of the patrons threw coffee in the cop's face. That started a riot. That started chairs being tossed. That started coffee cups, trash, purses being used, high heels as weapons against the police officers that attended. They did have a riot in place. It spilled out onto Turk and Taylor Streets, and it lasted from 2 to about 4 a.m. After they broke the windows out of the cafeteria and pretty well gutted the place, Compton's Cafeteria was made to close down at midnight. After that, it used to be open 24 hours. The next night, after they had got the windows replaced the following day, the girls started a picket line out in front of Compton's. And the Street Angels, and it was another group, let me get the name of it right. So I'm working off some notes here because there's a lot to this history. Vanguard. Vanguard was another queer youth group that was started at Glide Memorial Church. They started picketing with the transgender individuals. So it was a melding of not only transgender people, but LGBT people, street people, street orphans was another group that came in. And they combined, unified against the police. And that really started to change the tide. And on the second night, they did have another riot because the transgender people were not allowed into the cafeteria. And that group broke out the windows once again. It took several hours of fighting and people being hauled off in paddy wagons before it calmed back down again. But because of this event, social change started coming to San Francisco. It sparked the creation of the NCTU, which is the, let me get the name of this proper, National Transsexual Counseling Unit. And so it created a network of transgender social, psychological, and medical support services in 1968. And NCTU was the first peer-run support group and advocacy group in the world. So this was groundbreaking stuff that happened at Compton's Cafeteria. Because of this riot, things started to get a groundswell of support. We started being seen rather than being in the background. And working with our brothers and sisters in the LGBT groups, we could move forward. Compton's Cafeteria, when it did happen in 1966, it was a major North Bay or Northern California event. And that marked an LGBT territory in San Francisco. The next one we have is the Black Cat Tavern. Now this one's a little bit complicated. The Black Cat started out life in late 1966, and it was built in Los Angeles as a gay bar. The owners, again, had to deal with rule number 9, but LAPD also put into place rules of no touching, no male to male dancing or female to female dancing, no groping, things like that. They would throw these morality rules in place. And as you know, in the LGBT, we like to party. And we party hard. Well, in 1966, on New Year's Eve, the LAPD raided the Black Cat Tavern. And they had Christmas trees, they had all kinds of decorations up, and the place got destroyed. They raided it because they had an undercover officer in there that supposedly saw 2 males kissing. And that was enough for them to come in full force. 14 patrons were arrested and taken to jail. They were fingerprinted and booked, but they were also harassed on the way to and from jail. 2 male patrons that were arrested that night, that were the couple that was kissing, were forced to register as sex offenders under California law. They took that conviction all the way to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court upheld and did not allow their case to be appealed to them. They dismissed it, and those people to this day are still registered as sex offenders in the state of California for merely kissing. the Black Cat was one of the very first demonstrations that was organized by Steve Ginsburg, who is the founder of Pride. The demonstration had over 200 people involved, and they were protesting police brutality of LGBT individuals. Now, I know this happened on New Year's Eve. It took them until mid-February to organize the protest. And when they organized the protest, they went to the police station and they confronted the police. Things started changing a little bit in Los Angeles after that. Pride, which was personal rights in defense and education, and the Southern California Council on Religion and Homophile were the two organizations that banded together to create this demonstration, to actually bring it to a head. Steve Ginsburg also was instrumental in The Advocate, which was a newspaper in Southern California, which helped gay individuals write about what was going on in the times, make connections, things like that. This is all pre-computer era, pre-cell phone, pre-pager, all that good stuff that everybody takes for granted now. During this protest at the Black Cat and at the police station, the LAPD, of course, responded with squads of cops, and arrests were made. There's a picture of Black Cat there. It no longer is in existence. Unfortunately, a lot of these places have gone by way of history. But this incident started making this movement that we have today. That was the backbone of what begat all of the pride ceremonies and everything else that we've got going on now, and our fight for liberties and rights. After the Black Cat, there was another bar down in Los Angeles, which was called the Patch Bar. The Patch was lost to history. This bar was opened in late 1966, and it again was for the gay individuals in Los Angeles. Again, transgender people were not really allowed to hang out in there, but we did in certain times. But the Patch followed all the rules that the LAPD had put into place. And one thing is, when they would get undercover cops in, the owner of the bar, because he knew he couldn't control his patrons all the time, would play God Save the Queen on a jukebox. And the patrons learned after a little bit that meant follow the rules, don't touch each other, don't dance, don't do this, don't do that. One person allowed in the bathroom at a time. Follow the rules. And then he would play another song when the undercover agents from the LAPD would leave. And everybody could go back to normal. They got raided one night. And the owner had had enough. He'd had enough about being discriminated against. The owner of the Patch Bar, by the way, was a local comedian, which was funny because he would have his stand-up comedy act there at the same time that he did this. He couldn't have any drag queens. He couldn't have any drag queens performing because she would be shut down. That was a normal rule in 1960s, late 50s to 69. He couldn't do the things that a normal bar nowadays does. So he got raided and he got fed up. And he jumped on stage and he said, it's not against the law to be a homosexual, and it's not a crime to be in a gay bar. He then called for his patrons to yell at the cops, fight for your rights, and we are Americans too. Because just because we're gay or lesbian, bisexual, we didn't give up our rights. We're veterans, we're judges, we're whatever else. So he got fed up with this. Well, about 14 to 20 people again got arrested. That was an average number that would get arrested. And he took his remaining patrons and some of the neighborhood people and marched them all the way down to the local flower shop. He bought out every flower in the shop except for pansies. And he passed them out to his demonstrators. And then at 3 o'clock in the morning, he marched his demonstrators all the way down to the Harborview precinct in Los Angeles at 3 o'clock in the morning. The desk sergeant and the officers that were manning the station had no idea what to do. So they called for reinforcements and they showed up again in force. And of course, it was not a pleasant discussion, I'll put you that way. But what came out of this Patch Bar and out of the Black Cat in those two instances was a beginning of solidarity in Los Angeles, a beginning of fighting against the police brutality, the fighting against the marked discrimination that we fought for every day of our lives. It was said in LA that the police officers, once they booked you, or they didn't even have to book you, they would fingerprint you and harass you, drive by your work, because you could be fired for being gay or lesbian or cross-dressing at the time, and there was nothing you could do about it. The cops could actually blackmail you with that, and they did. But when we started gelling in Los Angeles, when the people started saying no more, these organizations, I'm sorry, my roommate's cat likes to play with me as I'm in this room. I apologize. We started gelling. We started working together and opening up organizations that would really make a difference. One of the organizations that came out of these two raids was the Metropolitan Community Church. Because when the patch was raided, Reverend Troy Perry, his boyfriend, was arrested that night. He spent 14 hours in jail. When he came out, he was really dejected, and the Reverend couldn't really console him. And he said that God doesn't care about us. Well, Reverend Perry was a Methodist minister, and he took that to heart. So he formed a church for outcasts called the Metropolitan Community Church. That church started in his living room with 12 men and women in 1968. Today, in 2020, that church currently has 43,000 members. These are impacts that has pushed us forward. This is what I'm talking about the history of what we do and who we are. We got moved forward because of these raids. We started becoming solid. We started becoming allies to one another. And those allyships spread out to straight people as well. Yet undercover, but nonetheless, those allyships were starting to form. This brings us up to the end of 1968.
Jeriann, would you have time for a question?
Sure.
Mozilla Mornster, I hope I got that right, asked, are there still morality clauses on the books?
In some states, yes. You'll find it mainly in the South, Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia. They still have a different morality clauses. California, for the most part, if there's any left, nobody actually enforces them, which is a nice thing.
Another question. During this time period was the Lavender Scare, but also the beginnings of women's marches, but also civil rights. What type of links were there for the LGBT community, specifically trans people, alongside some of these great movements?
That's a good question. A lot of times, transgender individuals had to fend for themselves because the lesbians and gays and bisexuals of the time didn't want us around that could bring trouble, bring them out of the closet, so to speak, because if we got arrested, they're going to get arrested too, more than likely, unless they had money. So it took all of these different pieces to actually start making us work together to help each other. The best way we were doing it was through magazines and newspapers like The Advocate, like the Bay Area Reporter of later years, to connect and to start working through underground churches. A lot of the stuff, because standard churches wouldn't have us, we created our own underground churches. And I've been studying on those recently. And that's how we linked together. That's how we worked together. to be able to move just a little bit farther forward and get understanding. Still today, a lot of people don't understand us transgender individuals in the LGB scene. So it was all Underground Railroad type connections we had to make. Any other questions?
Not at this time. Thanks, Jeriann.
Okay. So we're coming up to the beginning of Stonewall. We had a strong front on both coasts starting to form. They started to really work a little bit. Stonewall, the reason it is hailed as the beginning of the modern LGBT movement is multi-pronged. But Stonewall couldn't have happened without these previous raids, these previous riots, these previous demonstrations. In New York City, there were a lot of gay bars, a lot. However, 90% were owned by the mafia. And they were considered bottle bars. And a bottle bar is you bring your own liquor and you could drink it in the privacy of a bar with friends. So they didn't have to have a liquor license and didn't have to have oversight by ABC. And because they were controlled by the mafia and could pay off the cops, they had not as much trouble as other bars that were licensed through ABC and trying to stand on their own. Stonewall was owned by the Genovese family. And they would get raided every once in a while, but when they did get raided, they would get tipped off. You know, the cops are coming, you know, somebody drop a dime, as they said. And cops were coming, so they'd get the liquor out, and, you know, everybody had their own bottle and this and that. People weren't as harassed that way. But on the morning of June 28th, 2 o'clock in the morning in 1969, police raided the Stonewall without prior notification. Of course, you know, you don't want to do anything against the mafia. You don't want to try to make a name for yourself that way, and that's what the cops were trying to do at the time. They arrested 13 people, including employees, at the Stonewall. What happened next was really interesting. One of the women that was arrested, her head was shoved into the police car and she was injured, and she yelled out to the crowd. When she did that, the crowd that had assembled in front started rioting. The neighborhood on Christopher Street came out and they refused to disperse. They refused to leave the scene. They stood with the people at the Stonewall against the police, against the harassment, against the violence. Now, Stonewall's riot lasted 5 or 6 days. And it was organized. And that was the key. After the first night of this chaos, each night and each day after, people would gather in Christopher Plaza, Christopher Park across the street, and people would be there. Cops would come, and the protest started, the riot started all over again. It was organized, though. It was something that people started galvanizing around, whether you were gay or straight, because it was against police brutality and police harassment. They had a common cause. So Stonewall was more of a watershed moment, but that united both the East and the West right there. Stonewall is the reason we have Pride today. One year after Stonewall happened, they had the Christopher Street gay parade to commemorate what happened at Stonewall. And that morphed into Pride. In San Francisco, it was known as the Gay Freedom Day Parade. And it changed in 1971. It started its metamorphosis into Pride, which we celebrate now all over the world. This was a unifying moment. But this could not have happened without Cooper's Donuts, with Compton's Cafeteria, the Patch Bar. You know, these things couldn't, they built upon one another. And that's always been what I wanted to talk about, is how we are building upon this. Don't forget your history. Understand your history.
Jeriann, a question from the community.
Yeah.
The Louise Lawrence Transgender Archive. What's the owner of the Patch Bar's name?
Thank you. I have that here. Give me 1 second. I had it written down at one time, and he was an interesting character. It was owned by a comedian named Lee Glaze, Glaze. And he was just a local comedian at the time. Even Red Fox had a bar down in Los Angeles, and drag queens would perform there as well at that time. Any other questions?
Not yet.
Okay. So the significance of Stonewall and why they say this is the beginning of the modern LGBT movement is it galvanized the whole movement, and it led to the formation of the Gay Liberation Front, what we know today as HRC, the Human Rights Campaign. GLAAD, the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation. And PFLAG, Parents and Families and Friends of Lesbian and Gays. It was the explosion. Everything else was a slow burn and working its way up. This was the explosion of and significance of Stonewall. Now, I got to visit Stonewall in 2018, and it's a little hole in the wall bar. And those bartenders know the history. President Obama made it a National Historic Monument. And it is considered the very first National Historical Monument to LGBT rights and the LGBT movement. In San Francisco, we have a plaque for Compton's Cafeteria, locally from California in San Francisco. We are making strides. We're making headway. It's slow, but we are moving forward. Some of the changes that have come up is that all of the events occurred because of laws barring impersonation of the opposite sex, cross-dressing, transgender individuals behaving in accordance to their gender identity. We were at every one of these movements. We were at every one of these riots. Yet, a lot of times people don't see us. They just see the event and move on. Transgender individuals were the first among the LGBT community to fight back against these unjust laws, as you've just seen. We were fighting for our lives. We were fighting for our rights. We still struggle for recognition and respect. We still struggle for healthcare. We still struggle for housing. The poverty level for transgender individuals skews the national poverty level. It skews housing. You know, we end up still in the bottom of a lot of these different things that happen. And in this last bit of the Trump administration, taking away certain rights, taking away our right to serve our country. I'm a proud veteran. My sister Jenny is a proud veteran of 28 years. We're all Americans.
Jeriann, since you brought it up, you had mentioned earlier how once the trans and LGBT communities galvanized and started organizing, it led to a broader change and a broader movement. Another question from Mozilla Momster. Do you see a similar structure needed for underground networking and support due to our political climate?
Yes, I do. I 100% do. The problems with what we're doing right now, and this gets highlighted. There was a movie that came out a little while ago called When We Rise. And it was about some people I know, Cleve Jones and Cecilia Chung. They were talking about AIDS back in the 80s and 90s. And Cleve was begging the HRC to try to force the president to come and say something, apologize about all the years of no real movement with HIV, with recognition of the LGBT. Later on, it was the gay marriage, same-sex marriage. And the HRC said, well, it's not on our agenda. Transgender people have not been on an agenda for 50 years now. So it's up to us to organize. It's up to us to be trans-led organizations. Trans-Latina Coalition in Los Angeles, run by Bambi Salcedo. Because of her efforts, transgender people have health care in Los Angeles. They have the Transgender Wellness Center. Because of people like Tommy Clinton out in Palm Springs. Cecilia Chung in San Francisco when she was part of the health commission there, getting surgeries and medications covered by the city and county of San Francisco for us. We can't rely on our brothers and sisters in the LGB to fight our battles. We'll fight alongside you every step of the way. Don't get me wrong, I'm not drawing a line. But you have to understand our struggles are different than yours in a sense, because we are part of the LGB. I'm bisexual. I've got friends of mine that are lesbian. Yeah, we're transgender, but we're part of that LGB on that side, but we're not seen that way. So we have to do underground movements. We have to do underground safety, move people from areas in the country right now that are highly against us and get them to safety, especially in this Trump era. And in the next 90 days, some of us are afraid for our lives. Just today, I was informed of somebody who passed in Miami who was murdered by their partner, and then the partner committed suicide. We have to have the underground in order to survive.
Jeriann, I think you mentioned before, there's no way to discuss really any type of LGBTQ history without discussing AIDS and the AIDS epidemic and what happened in our community. Do you want to discuss any of that and how it affected the trans community specifically?
Sure. Little bit of history. I was in the military right before AIDS hit. And we never learned about these universal precautions that you have now, masks and gloves and stuff. You got a wound, you treated it, you cleaned it up as best you can, and you put it together, you're done. I became an EMT when I got out of the military. And first things are is put your latex gloves on. Well, why? Oh, AIDS. Okay, it wasn't talked about. Transgender individuals besides gay men, and I'm going to put it in that term, were some of the hardest hit groups with HIV/AIDS. Even today, as we speak right now, the AIDS epidemic still ravages us because we can't go to the doctor. We get discriminated against going to the doctor. You know, you're trans what? In San Francisco, they made leaps and bounds for everything. But 30 miles away where we're at in Solano County, you're trans what? Oh, how do we help you? See, we are lesbian, we are gay, we are bisexual. We are heterosexual. We can fit any of those categories and more. And AIDS for us has been devastating because of the lack of care, because of the lack of resources, because of the lack of groups that we can discuss. This is what's going on with us. Our mental health takes a hit, you know, from depression, anxiety, PTSD, and a host of other problems. Because who do you turn to? I can turn to my friends who are gay or lesbian, but they don't know my struggle. They don't know what it's like for me to go to the doctor and say, I need. Well, why do you need it? You know?
Yeah.
And then you have doctors outright treat you like dirt and they don't hide it. You stop going. You know, the lack of jobs that we have. A lot of us transgender people are very educated. A lot of us transitioned late in life, like myself. I started transitioning at 49. You know, it's just been recently, within the past 10 years, that you've seen that number drop down. In other countries, it was 18. Here, it's been later in life. But yet, my knowledge, my experience, I'm looked at as, you're different. So, no, we can't hire you, which leads us back into poverty and leads us back into drug addiction. How do you survive prostitution? With prostitution, what comes? Well, syphilis, gonorrhea, AIDS, HIV, you name it, hepatitis C. Where do we go?
I think you're probably minimalizing all those intersections and all the different ways a person can be unique and still have the same disparities in the same communities. We have another question from Marlette. And Marlette asks, why do you think there's such a foot dragging with the LGBT community towards transgender folk? I guess the LGB community, rather.
This may ruffle some feathers. I think the foot dragging comes because of our upbringing, our Christian upbringing. If you look at indigenous cultures, two-spirit people in the United States, from any of the indigenous populations here in South America, indigenous populations, Central America, Philippines, China, Japan, they all have two-spirit people, people who are, for lack of a better term, LGBT. There are more than that in that. But Christianity said that we were wrong and we were dirty. You don't imitate the opposite sex. You don't do what they do. You don't dress as they dress. You are a freak. And that's been ingrained in society for 100 years or more, 200 years, 300 years. But yet I can go back to history books and show you where in 1767, this one woman posed as a man and was one of the greatest spies in Europe at the time in the 1700s. Then we have people like Charlie Parkhurst, who was a stagecoach, one of the best stagecoach people around. Didn't find out Charlie was a woman until Charlie was dead. It was at the morticians.
Well, what do you think that people in the LGBT community can do to be better allies for transgender people? And as far as that goes, Veronica wants to know, how can allies that aren't LGBT best support transgender communities?
Listen to us and defend us. Don't just defend us saying, oh, behind the scenes, in front of our faces, oh, well, no, that's a she, not a he. If you're in conversation with somebody and they refer to somebody, say, no, that's Jeriann. She is. Not just in front of my face. Talk to us. Learn our stories. Spread the word that we're not evil monsters, because people see us that way. They see us as strange. You know, it's hard for us to understand our own selves. My transition has been 10 years now. As of October 21st, 2020, it's been 10 years. And I'm still learning things about myself. I'm still learning how to navigate being in a female body. In other cases, I've got a friend of mine who's learning to navigate being in a male body. When you're not brought up that way because of taboos and things like that, we don't know what questions to ask. How do you take care of yourself? How do you bathe? How do you shower? How do you, whatever. We're still learning that. And we still need help with that. We still need to be able to talk to people about that. We still need the understanding, but not the pity. We're smart individuals. I've got friends of mine that are, 2, 3 PhDs, and others that are factory workers, but yet they can't get those jobs back. Why? Put a good word in for us. Hey, I know somebody who knows somebody who can do this. That's how you can be our allies. Open doors for us so we can be self-sufficient, just like everybody else. That's all we want to is be like everybody else, but in our own skin. And that's not just transgender, that's gender nonconforming, gender diverse. Let us be ourselves. And you'll see us blossom, and you will be the better for it. I think that's a key here. I've learned a lot from my niece, and her patience, her guiding, her understanding, and the friends that she introduced me to have helped me move forward quite a bit. If it wasn't for them, I would not be making this presentation today, because I would not be here. Listen to us.
Jeriann, I would like to remind you, if it weren't for you, a lot of other people wouldn't be here. And it's just that type of ripple in a pond effect thing that I think these types of conversations have in community, and already people wanting to know how to become better allies, and how and when to stand up for their trans friends and their non-binary friends, or their children for that matter. I really appreciate you're willing to share, some of those personal stories. I know that it doesn't come along without hurt sometimes, and that it's difficult. So thanks very much. We don't have any more questions, so if you want to.
There's still a little bit of my presentation if you'd like to listen to it.
Of course.
What I want to get into right now is the first Transgender Day of Remembrance. There were several murders in the mid to late 1990s that accumulated or occurred, including the murder of Rita Hester. Rita was born in November 30th, 1963. She was murdered on November 28th, 1998. And from the get-go, with the police and everybody, news outlets, and news reporting. They reported it was a transgender man that got murdered. They reported Rita's name in quotations like it was a nickname, Yogi, type of thing. And it got a lot of press back east. When Rita's mom was called about her murder, they had told her that her son had been murdered, even though Rita was dressed as female. She was found in her apartment at 6:12 p.m. in Allston, Massachusetts. She had been stabbed multiple times in the chest. There was a bloody footprint left at the scene, and her phone had been ripped out of the wall. She was alive when the police got to her within 7 minutes. She died an hour later on the way to the hospital. The Boston Globe, Boston Herald, and the Bay Windows, which was an LGBT newspaper of the time, were the ones that misgendered her. And within 4 days of her killing, there were up to 250 people marching on those newspapers, demanding that they change their coverage and name her as she was. You got to figure, this is 1998, so it's not that long ago. According to the Boston Globe, they were just following the AP guidelines. And this is where we have a problem right now that we need to fight in the state of California, is the misgendering of people when they are murdered. That's what keeps us on the TDOR of finding names 6 months later. It's like, oh, they were killed in 2016, but yet we don't find out until 2018 that this is who they were. It inhibits police investigations, because if you know me as Jeriann and I get murdered, if I hadn't changed my identifications, the police would say, do you know James? Who was James's enemies? You know who Jeriann's are. I make them all the time. But we need to change that. We're not protecting the families. My families know exactly who I am. These other people that have died in California, their families know that they are transgender or gender nonconforming or non-binary. And if they go by a different name, use that name, because that's where you're going to find your information. We need to get a statewide initiative going, so that way when we do change our names legally and our gender, that it covers all of the state agencies. I went to apply for unemployment and they said, oh, you don't exist, James does. Yet I've had my name changed since 2012. These are things that we fight. And I know, yesterday listening to Gwendolyn, she picked up on that. She picked up on the misgendering and the disappearance of Rita and of the other women that had been murdered at that time in Massachusetts. One of their killers in one of the women who was brought to justice wasn't even found guilty of murder because of trans panic defense, which they outlawed in California, thank God, recently. But upon discovering that their sexual partner was transgender, the subject went into a rage and killed so-and-so. So it was considered justified. And it was considered manslaughter. By the way, that man only served 2 years of his sentence. So we were systematically being erased. So Gwendolyn started a website called Remembering Our Dead. And she started that because she was in conversation with somebody, from what I understand. And they hadn't heard of Rita Hester. They hadn't heard of these killings, even though they were through the press. And that bothered her. And that website was the inspiration for the first TDOR, which happened in 1999. So we're celebrating its 21st year now, in a sense. These things that we've gone through, all these movements, all these pushing with all the way up to Stonewall, and now TDOR starting in 1999, they built upon each other, and we needed these. We needed this day. Now, I said that Rita was born on November 30th of 1963. We know Thanksgiving is always the week prior to that. So it was smart to have November 20th, which is the week before all of the other celebratory things for the end of the year happen. This is a way to close out this year. That's why we work from, at least Serenity does, November 1 through October 31st to gather the names for the years and consider that a year. I know some people say it's November 20th to November 20th. Few days is few days, but this year we've got 45 murders. 45 individuals that have lost their lives because of somebody hating us, somebody not valuing our lives. And the point I want to get across about TDOR and about what this means right now is that if you don't value our lives, whose lives do you value? Because obviously there's other women out there who are not transgender that are being murdered. There's other LGBT people, Pulse nightclub, that have been murdered. We mark this day as a solemn occasion. We thank goodness now that we have Transgender Awareness Week, so we can bring these things up and bring it to a wider audience. Because when we started this, they didn't have that. So when Gwendolyn started Remembering Our Dead, that became the official site. There's many sites out there now, and we cross-reference as many as we can. But some statistics, by the way, there's Rita Hester, and there's her apartment in Allston, Massachusetts, where she was murdered. Her murderer, to this day, 22 years later, has still not been brought to justice, which is sad. Some of the latest statistics, please bear with me. From January 2008 to September 2020, we've had 3,664 transgender and gender diverse people worldwide murdered, the bulk coming from Brazil. The United States, from 1999 to 2015, had 209 murders of transgender and gender diverse people. 209 in 16 years. Since we've been under Trump and his pre-election everything. From 2016 to today, we've had 144 transgender and gender diverse people murdered in the United States, adding that to the 209. This year was the deadliest year on record in the US with 45 murders and 7 suicides of transgender and gender diverse people. The numbers are supposed to be going down, people, not up. We're supposed to be gaining acceptance. We're supposed to be equal. Under this administration, all that equality has been taken away, except in California, New York, and a few handfuls of states. Even Portland has seen an uprising against the LGBT. These numbers are staggering. They're hurtful. I never thought that I would have to read 45 names out loud. Or since I started Serenity Center, 150 names. That's wrong.
Jeriann, do you have time for a really quick question?
Yes.
Adrian asks, how do we reach out to trans folks all over Solano County? What's the best way if we want to reach out and say other LGBT serving organizations like Solano Pride, Serenity Center? How would you reach out to the trans community? What are some of the best ways to reach out?
That's a tricky question. It's a very good question, but it's a very tricky question because California on a whole, let me start there, up until the mid 1990s was very conservative. In Solano County itself, in 2015, was the only county solidly in opposition to same-sex marriage. We know by statistics that there should be around 2,000 transgender people in the county. And the best way to reach them is by coming and making yourself available to Pride, to Serenity. Serenity is a trans-led organization, flat out. My board of directors that we have, one half of the board of directors are transgender, gender nonconforming. Talk to us. Help us table events. Get us out to where we can bring other people in that are transgender because they're closeted. And I know that Jamie and I know that Tom can probably back me up on when we've done engagements talking about transgender rights and things like that in the county. It's been a very light turnout because everybody's scared. And they've been scared for years. I put the target on my back and I won't be scared. But everybody else seems to say, oh, I'll contact you a little bit or whatever. I'm finally reaching out to a lot more now. We're passing out food boxes. Serenity Center's passed out 30 to 35 food boxes a week for the past 2 months now.
Oh.
And I'm meeting more transgender and LGBT individuals that way. And I say, oh, hey, we didn't know. You know, we need to get allies out there to talk about us. Give out our card. If you know somebody who is needing assistance or who may need to talk to somebody, give them our cards. Come get our cards, pass them out. My phone's on right here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's how I've met a lot of other transgender folk. They call me, hey, I need help. What can you do? That's how you can help.
You were mentioning how Solano is somewhat conservative and that you've worked within Solano County to try and support transgender people the best way you can. What are some of the obstacles in Solano County that you run into when trying to find services or support?
The closed minds in the cities, the closed minds like in Vacaville City, in the City Hall of Vallejo, you know, when the city manager, we request to fly the transgender flag for Transgender Awareness Week or Transgender Day of Remembrance, and they say, oh, we already fly the pride flag. That's enough for you people. Really? You know, that's, I think if the cities would recognize us, if the cities would put us to work, create positions that we can interact with the public and feel a part of the city, whether it's Vallejo or Fairfield or Vacaville or Dixon or Rio Vista, Suisun. The cities always talk about the civic pride and we're so diverse and da 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 da. They don't include transgender individuals. They don't include the LGBT. Vallejo was the Castro before the Castro was the Castro. Okay, that's documented.
I don't think a lot of people know that about Solano County. And I know from doing advocacy work alongside you and doing social work alongside you, there are a lot of things that happen in this county that most residents don't know about.
Yeah.
You know, it's worth saying that transgendered people, especially transgender people of color, sit at the top, the very tip top of some of the nastiest lists we have: homelessness, poverty, suicide, mental health issues, CSEC, or commercial sexual exploitation of children. Um, you know, all of those things tighten a community once they find out about them. What do you think is the best way to get those messages out to people?
I think we need to talk to our families. We need to talk to our churches. We need to talk to the man in the street and break the stigma. I mean, if we can make an inroad, you know, I mean, back in the 60s, I mean, I don't know how old you are, Jamie, but I remember Liberace, his golden, you know, pianos and, you know, candelabras and the way he dressed. He was America's sweetheart for playing the piano. He was the first Elton John, so to speak. And I remember talking to my grandmother and I said, he's gay. She goes, oh, no, he's not. He's just a good piano player. And then all hell broke loose during the AIDS crisis with Liberace and Rock Hudson and a few others. Her world was crashed. Okay.
As was my mother's and grandmother's for those very same reasons.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt, and I hope it bleeds into where we're going now. This has just been such a fascinating, deep, and really poignant talk, and timely as well, with everything that's happening in our country, everything that's happened since COVID, and Black Lives Matters, of course, the galvanizing of a nation to come together for what's right. And of course, our trans people are right there in the groups, as our LGBT, as our every other denomination. Where are we going, Jeriann? Where do we need to go?
We are making inroads. I mean, back in 2010, Victoria Kolakowski became a Superior Court judge in Alameda County. November 3rd this year, Sarah McBride was elected to the Delaware Senate. We, in recent justice election as well, a 24-year-old was put on the Redwood City Council, and she's a non-binary person, but she's the first one in the Bay Area. Mind you, Compton's Cafeteria, 1966, and here we are 50 years later, and we're finally getting a non-binary person on the city council. We just had a great thing happen with Star Trek Discovery, where we've had a transgender and a non-binary person each picked as actors in the show, and they're playing their characters as transgender and gender non-conforming, non-binary on the show. We've had Janet Mock, we've had all these other people that have come out and started to make us more mainstream, Scott Turner Schofield, who's a friend of mine, he's went from The Young and the Restless to movies, and he has his own stand-up 127 Ways to Be a Man show that he does. We're moving forward. More transgender and non-binary people ran for elected office in 2020 than at any other time in our history, 240 some odd years. We're moving forward, but we need the help of the LGB. We need the help of our straight allies, because your voices will carry farther and louder than mine will. Speak up, get us to be able to stand in front of city council, get us to be able to help write these laws that we need to help get transportation to medical appointments. I mean, being transgender and going through all this, I was homeless for 3 years. If it wasn't for my friends putting me up on couches and on floors with blankets, I wouldn't be here doing this. Get us in front of these people, change some of these laws so it doesn't make it so hard to do things. It's great. Hey, I can go all the way to Rainbow Community Center in Contra Costa County for therapy. That's great. It's a $20 trip. That $20 could be food. That $20 could be a blanket or putting lights on in the house. Same thing going to San Francisco when I first started transitioning to at Lion Martin. We need the help. We need the allies all across the board. And, Pride has been very good with their allyship. I mean, I remember when you guys started, and I remember way back when with Donna. She helped me. I don't know if Don has ever told you this. She was on the road with me when we designed the Star Trek Monopoly games.
Awesome.
And so those days of what this county looked like and where we're at, where we're going, we've moved light years, but we've only moved an inch at the same time. And that's where we need what we need. We need help. We need introductions. We need people to help us write legislation for us, irrespective of the LGBT part of us, that help us. We've got this new bill that went through and came across the governor's desk, which now gives us $15 million in grant money for the transgender health and wellness. Okay, it's got to be administered by trans-led organizations. That's a step. That's a positive step. But help us get the other stuff through too. Changing our names, changing our genders, and getting it statewide at one time. Because me going back to the court right now, I went to apply for a hunting license, and DMV still had me in their computer system as my old name. Oh, well, go back to the court and get your copy of your name change and gender change and send it to us. That's $40. That's 8 weeks wait. We can't do that. We don't have the time. The average age of a transgender person before they are murdered is 35. I'm 60.
I think that your resiliency must have been handed down to you from great people. Maybe it's your Native American. One of the things we advocate at Solano Pride Center, more than anything else really, is to take a look at some of those industrial policies that we have in our own workspaces, those check the box questions, male, female. Are there other avenues? Is there an other box? If you're going to ask what gender, make sure that you're asking or you're giving us the choices that we need, or leave it blank and forget about them. For youth and for parents and LGBT parents, and really any parent, when you're filling out all of those forms and it says mother and father, it doesn't leave any room for anything other than really what America has seen thus far.
Yeah.
How often? Okay, I asked Gwen last night, and I know you have a list too. But if you were going to wave the magic wand, and after January, and President-elect Biden becomes the president of the United States, what are your top 5? What policies do you hope to see reversed, changed, initiated? What do we need to pay attention to?
I think what we need, my top 5, is similar to Gwen's, because I need to see the transgenders people, transgender individuals back in the military. Jenny Lorena Thomas, who sits on my board, who is a sister to me, she worked with Obama and the DOD, and she was the one that wrote the guidelines for that during the Obama administration. We need to be back there. We need to be able to serve. We need health care. Flat across the board, we need health care. We need mental health care that is real health care. Not this, oh, well, you get therapy one time every 6 weeks. That doesn't work. In 6 weeks' time, I could have committed suicide. over something that I could have talked out with a therapist. Medical care, get us on medications. You know, my patches that I wear, my hormone patches shouldn't cost me $435. That's when you're making minimum wage or less, that doesn't work for us. Many of us go without our medications because of that. Get a jobs initiative going. You know, even if it's an employer credit for hiring somebody who's gender nonconforming or transgender, non-binary, whatever, so that we can get back out in the workforce and we can live on our own. Those are things that I think that the president could get through Congress, because it's just bringing us to be equals on the floor. Being equals instead of being third-rate citizens, you know? And then the other big thing is, I think there needs to be national police reform, because the LGBT in a whole, not just the transgender individuals, but in the whole, are discriminated against by the police on such a high rate. You know, it's like Black Lives Matter, that we're abused, we're targeted, or we're ignored. You know, when I call the police about somebody who's been raped and abused, and I don't get an officer for 4 hours because, oh, it was put onto the back burner.
I saw a really disturbing video taken at one of the demonstrations of a Black transgendered woman being beaten by a mob of people. And it occurs to me that Black Lives Matters and trans Black lives are these fights that we seem to constantly be fighting as separate organizations. And this time, it seems like we all came to the show. The LGBTs were in force. We had our communities that were rallying together. And as you said, we're good at organizing.
Oh yeah, we're good. Partying and organizing, we're number one at.
That's right. And you know something? Because LGBT people are everyone, and we're everywhere, we're every culture, we're every color. I, for one, I feel that we are taking a step forward as a country. And I hope that you're right. And I hope that all of, well, your top 5 and my top 5 are pretty close. But I'm a veteran too. And you know, when you serve in the military under policies like don't ask, don't tell, it's not really that inclusive. But when you're serving in the military as a transgendered person, and there are people that are serving in the military as transgendered people, you know, it doesn't leave any room for that family. It doesn't leave any room for the kinship that you find in military or the team-like atmospheres, because you're always so disjointed. And I feel that that's true also in our society. You know, I believe in visibility and hearing live experiences from people that have lived that life, and you are a testament to what we're talking about. And going forward, do you think that we have a chance to pull it all together in 4 years?
I don't know about 4 years, maybe 8 or 12, just to really start pulling things together. A little known fact about the military, by the way. There's a rule in the military, that's part of the UCMJ, If you are intersex in the military, you can choose what gender you want to serve under as. And that was actually put in place, written in 1863. So that's one section of the military that has helped a few people, I know. But I think it's going to take 12 years. I think it's going to take more activism. I think our centers, not only Pride and Serenity, but the Trans-Latina Coalition, El Para El in San Francisco, LA Gender Justice, all these organizations need to get together again and get to Sacramento and start working on our representatives there and on our local representatives that are our Washington, D.C. representatives to say, wait a minute, our votes counted. We got you in office. Now we're going to put the pressure on and you better perform. Just stuff that has been hidden and shoved in the corner. We can't stand for that anymore because we're not going to be erased.
And literally lives are at risk.
Yes.
And, you know, to your point, more trans people, or at least reported as trans people, have been murdered this year than any other recorded. And worldwide, those numbers are just astounding. And you know, taking a step back and gaining a different perspective and realizing that even with all of our problems in this country, we as LGBT folks are somewhat better off than other peoples in other countries. How do you think that our foreign relations and our view as a country and the relationships we have with other countries, how do you think that the way we treat our trans people speaks to other countries with similar issues?
I think we allow too much to happen. I mean, the top 3 countries for murders of transgender people are Brazil this year with 141, Mexico with 55, the United States with 45. I think our policies need to change with these other countries for human rights for us, so that we can be put on equal footing in other countries and not demonized by the Catholic Church. I mean, Brazil is known for being run by the Catholic Church, and they have 141 murders. That speaks to itself. Mexico, Catholic Church, 55 murders. United States, a Christian country, 45 murders. Common denominator in all of that is overt church influence. And we have to start pushing back on that and saying, wait a minute, no. The 10 tenets of all religions, and of the 4,200 religions there are treat one another as if you want to be the way you want to be treated. Love one another, respect one another. I wrote a whole paper on this. There is no hate, bigotry, misogyny. There is no homophobia, transphobia, or any of these others. Learn to get along with one another as you are, or as you envision yourself to be. We need to make that a guiding principle in dealing with other countries, in giving aid, in in helping democracy move forward. Bring up the tolerance that the Bible teaches for the Christians. You know, there's been so much overlap lately under this last administration of overt Christian fundamentalism. And those bathroom bills that went through and those things that they were trying to get going. They spoke to the European mindset of the 1600s, not the 2020s or the 2000s, 400 years ago. We need to change that. We need to move forward.
I think, like you said, maybe 4 years might be a little might be a little ahead of myself there, but you know, words like soji are now being introduced, you know, internationally to describe gender and sexual orientation and gender identity and expression. I hope, let's leave it at this. As we have, you know, with every night that we close out, do you have a message that you can give to LGBT youth, specifically trans youth? Do you have a message for them?
Yeah. My message to you is that you're okay the way you are. However you see yourself is right. It's nobody should judge you for you. We were not a mistake. We are not broken. We are not strange. There's a beautiful life out there. Follow your path. Get the help when you want it, when you need it, so you can move forward. Because that's all anybody wants to do, is move forward. And I know that the youth of this country right now are on the biggest and fastest path. They've amazed me. They really have. I got a friend of mine who her child is non-binary. And they amaze me as to how well they navigate the world. And I'm in awe of all of you.
Well, I'm in awe of you, Jeriann. I'd like to thank you on behalf of our LGBT community for your continued advocacy and work. You're just astounding and truly dedicated. More than anything, though, I'd like to thank you for being the best type of role model any young LGBT person could aspire to become or look up to. Your works, again, undoubtedly saved thousands of lives, and I'm so grateful to know you. For everyone that's watching, I hope you'll join us for the rest of this week's programming. Tomorrow we have the Asterix Youth Group, and we'll be having a panel discussion. So with that, I will say good evening. Jeriann, thank you so much.
You're so welcome. And we're going to have Transgender Day of Remembrance, City Hall steps, 3:30 in the afternoon, Saturday afternoon. For those that would like to come, bring your cell phone so you can Facebook Live it so we can get it spread out there. We're going to honor 45 people.
Right. And we will be doing a virtual rendition of that on Friday from 5 to 7 as well. So I'll see you out there. Keep doing your work, Jeriann, and we'll talk real soon.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much.